Imagine standing on a beach where every grain of sand is soaked with the blood of young soldiers. A plan that seemed perfect, turning into a nightmare within minutes. This isn't just a battle, it's a moment that shaped the entire direction of the war. And today, we're stepping right into that place, with all the raw, unfiltered truth of history. November 1943. If you close your eyes for a moment, try to picture this. The entire Pacific looked like a giant chessboard, and every piece was being moved not just by guns and ships, but by the decisions of the men staring at those maps. After Guadalcanal, the Americans felt, perhaps for the first time, that they could seize the initiative. They no longer had to react to Japan's next strike. Now, they would decide the next move of the war. But as you know, in war, no decision is ever simple. In Washington, a fierce debate erupted between the two most influential commanders in the Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz of the Navy and General Douglas MacArthur. I remember a veteran once telling me, in war, sometimes the enemy isn't as scary as when your own commanders can't agree. That sentence feels uncannily accurate when you look at this moment. Nimitz wanted to drive straight through the Central Pacific, the fastest, most direct route to Japan. MacArthur believed the South Pacific was the key, the theater he commanded, and he didn't want it overshadowed. What about you? If you were making the call, which path would you choose? In the end, President Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs sided with Nimitz, and with a single order, hundreds of ships changed course. The first targets on this new path were the Gilbert Islands, three names that sound small and forgettable: Makin, Abemama, and Tarawa. But history has a habit of turning the smallest places into the biggest stories. And Tarawa? Well, Tarawa was anything but ordinary. Picture an island so small that if you stand on one end, you can almost see the other. And yet, the Japanese turned Baishio, the main island of Tarawa, into a true fortress of steel. Over 4,800 elite troops, hundreds of concrete bunkers, coastal guns positioned so tightly that every inch of ground was a potential kill zone. The Japanese commander, Shibazaki, once said something historians like me still quote today. Not even 1 million Americans could take Tarawa in 100 years. Arrogant? Maybe. But if you were standing on the deck of a ship, on the morning of November 20, 1943, staring at that wall of steel and fire, you'd understand why he dared to say it. And this very moment, is the doorway to one of the bloodiest battles in the entire Pacific War. But before we step into that storm, I want you to ask yourself one question. What makes a person choose to face something that almost certainly could take their life? The answer lies just ahead. As the sun rose over the horizon on November 20th, 1943, the entire island of Betio lay in the sights of the US fleet. If you've ever watched a storm rolling in from afar, dark, heavy, suffocating, that's probably close to what the Japanese soldiers saw. Massive warships, carriers, gunboats, landing craft, an entire machine of war slowly moving toward them. I want you to imagine standing on the deck of an LVT transport, the salty wind hitting your face, the engine rumbling beneath your boots. You have no idea how many minutes you have left to live. A former Marine once told me, in that moment, I wasn't thinking about winning or losing. All I could think was, will I even make it onto that beach? 1. The opening bombardment, when hope collides with reality. At 5 a.m., American guns opened fire. Tons of explosives rained down on Tarawa, turning the island into a boiling cloud of black smoke. On the ships, many Marines breathed a little easier, convinced nothing could possibly survive that storm of fire. Some were certain the battle would be over quickly. But they didn't know that the small bunkers and coconut log and concrete shelters the Japanese had been building since 1942, structures that we historians still consider masterpieces of Pacific War defensive engineering, were barely touched. They were too small, too low, too solid to be wiped out in a few hours, and when the American guns fell silent, the Japanese stepped out, fully intact.
Back in position.
Waiting. Many veterans told me the same thing. We hadn't even reached the beach yet, and we already knew this was going to be a bloodbath. 2. A chaotic landing, walking straight into the beast's mouth. As the LVTs started moving toward the beach, everything went according to plan, for the first few minutes. These amphibious tractors had tracks that could crawl over the razor-sharp coral reef that ringed the island. Then came the LCVPs, Higgins boats carrying most of the force, trying to cross the reef. And just as the Kiribati locals had warned, warnings that were ignored, the tide that day was far too low. The shallow water exposed jagged coral that simply couldn't be crossed. Hundreds of Marines were forced to jump into the sea and wade through chest-deep water, nearly 700 yards from shore, directly in the sights of Japanese machine guns already locked in. Try picturing that. Nearly half a kilometer of salt water, heavy soaked gear, rifles filled with seawater, and ahead of you, the densest wall of fire you can imagine. No cover, no trenches, nothing except hope that the bullets wouldn't find you first. A survivor once said, "I looked down and saw the water turn red. I couldn't bring myself to look again." Radios were destroyed by seawater. Officers were shot the moment they broke the surface. Platoons lost contact with companies. Companies lost contact with battalions. No one knew who was still alive, who was leading, who had fallen. The message sent back to headquarters contained only a few words. Casualties, 70%. Card hold. 3. Red Beach, the meat grinder. Red Beach 1 and 2, the main landing zones, became the center of a steel hurricane. The Japanese had positioned machine guns to create interlocking kill zones, and their 75mm guns, hidden deep in bunkers, could punch right through the LVTs. Tiny firing slits, barely visible, spat out death with terrifying precision. I once asked a veteran, "What made you keep moving when everyone around you was going down?" He stayed quiet for a moment and finally said, "Because if I turned back, I wouldn't be able to live with myself." Tarawa was a place where survival instinct and duty slammed into each other with brutal force. 4. A moment that changed everything, the death of Shibazaki. Just as the battle seemed to tilt decisively toward the Japanese, something unexpected happened. Their commanding officer, Colonel Shibazaki, was killed by a U.S. naval shell while moving between bunkers. Many historians, including myself, agree that if Shibazaki had survived just a few more hours, he likely could have organized a night counterattack and pushed the Marines back into the sea. The Japanese had done it on other islands, and they were frighteningly effective at night assaults. One moment, one shell, can sometimes redirect the entire course of history. Tarawa is proof that war is never just strategy and planning. It's chaos, unpredictable moments that no general can foresee. 5. Day 2 and 3. Crushing every last bunker. Once the Marines secured a few small footholds on the beach, they began bringing in Sherman tanks. The Shermans crawled across the sand, slow but unstoppable, blasting Japanese bunkers with 75mm shells. HK-1 flamethrowers turned defensive strongpoints into blazing infernos. Small assault teams crawled on their stomachs, placing satchel charges directly into bunker openings. If you look at the battlefield maps, the American advance looks like a tightening pocket, a shrinking zone where the remaining Japanese made their final stand. And every inch of that pocket was paid for in blood. The Japanese launched several banzai attacks, but without leadership and already exhausted, they couldn't break through Marine lines. The remaining defenders fought to the last man, true to the Imperial Army's creed, no surrender. 6. The end. Baishio falls. On the morning of November 23rd, after 76 straight hours of fighting, the gunfire finally faded. The smoke drifted away, and over the ruins of Baishio, the American flag was raised. But no one cheered. No one celebrated. A veteran once said, "We didn't feel like we'd won. We just felt like we were still alive." Tarawa had fallen, but the price, paid in just 3 days, was nearly the same as 6 months of fighting on Guadalcanal. 3 days, but it felt like an entire lifetime. As the last gunshots faded on that blood-soaked beach, the surviving Marines walked past charred wrecks, smoking craters, and the bodies of friends who would never go home. That landing, though technically a victory, didn't feel like a triumphant feat. It felt like a brutal reminder that every success in war is paid for with real people, with names, memories, and families that will never be whole again. After that day, Allied Command understood something clearly. They hadn't just fought to capture a strip of land. They had cracked open the door to the decisive phase of the entire war. That blood-red beach became a strategic foothold that helped push the enemy back, and it forced the world to rethink how modern war was being fought. It showed that even the most flawless plan on paper could collapse against harsh reality, and that the courage of ordinary soldiers would always be the one element no strategy could replace. But perhaps the greatest legacy of that battle isn't marked on any map. It lives in the human heart. The men who survived didn't talk much about beating the enemy. They talked about friendships forged in hell, about hands pulling each other back from the edge of death. And those stories became the foundation for a timeless lesson. Peace is never guaranteed, and every generation has a responsibility to protect it. The landing may have ended, but its echoes remain. A reminder that history isn't written only in military reports, but in the memories of those who lived, fought, and sacrificed so the world today could be a little more peaceful. If this story helped you see war from a deeper angle, from the viewpoint of human memory, sacrifice, and the lives behind the headlines, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our historical journey. This is Aegis War Archives, and we still have many stories ahead that you won't be able to look away from. See you next time.